Welcome back to Foley Systems. I'm Blake. You just got your hands on a Cisco router, but you're staring at the CLI wondering, what's next? Don't you worry, I got you covered. Today, we're diving into the basics of a Cisco router configuration. We're talking hostname setup, securing your passwords, enabling SSH, and configuring basic IP settings like DHCP and static IP to interfaces. By the end of this video, your router will be ready to rock and roll. So let's get started. You're going to open up your terminal emulator choice via either PuTTY or Mobile Xterm. For my use case, I use Mobile Xterm. Make sure you got your console cable connected. Once you have that all connected, you should, if the router's brand out of the box, you should see, or the router has been reset, System Configuration Dialog. It's going to be basically ask, would you like to enter the initial configuration? We're going to say no. We're going to do everything by hand. So let me enlarge this text for you. After it spits all this gibberish, we'll be ready to go to privilege exec mode. So to enter privilege exec mode, you're going to have to type in en or enable. So we just entered the privilege exec mode. Now let's go to global configuration. We're going to type in configure terminal. On the configure terminal, let me get this display cleared real quick. We're going to set the host name. So we're going to say host name, any host name you'll like your router to be. Let's say Foley router. So now you have set the host name of your router. You're also going to have to put it on a domain name. This is mandatory to be able to use SSH, since we're going to generate a RSA certificate later on in the video. It doesn't have to be a real domain. We could say IP domain dash name, and let's just say tacos.local. It could be any domain name. It could be your business or home domain's name. We could say google.com, for instance. That's a domain name. Or foleysystems.com. Which I'm going to set my domain to my current business domain, of course. You could change it to any you like. Doesn't matter. It could be named taco.chicken. We just need some domain placeholder, so that way when we generate the certificate, it will say domain. It'll have that domain name within it. So we have configured so far our host name, and we have also configured our domain name for our router. So let's quickly save our configuration before we make any more major changes. So to exit global configuration mode, just type in end. To save our configuration, we say copy run to start. That way we get a save point. Now let's go back to configure terminal. Now let's say I want to know which interface to configure. So let's go back. Let's do IP. Or no, let's do show IP interface brief. So this gives us a brief overview of our interfaces. So on a typical router, this is typical configuration, we'll usually use Gigabit Ethernet 000 for our WAN. And then any of these three ports as our internal. So we're going to use for our instance for video, it doesn't matter how you got your LAN configured. It could be on Gigabit 3, 2, or 1. But for my instance, in my use case, we're going to say gigabit 000. So we're going to configure that to a DHCP client. Unless you have a static IP from your ISP, you can set it as a static IP. I'll show you how to do that. So let's configure terminal. Let's go interface GI for gigabit 000. And now you can always do shift question mark to see what available commands we could do. For instance, we need to do IP. What can we do with that IP command? Well, we could do quite a bit. There's one in particular we're looking for, which is address. So you're going to type in address. And then you got more /flags we can use. So to set up a static IP, you would say, for instance, let's do Google DNS, or we'll do a random IP. We'll say 95.26.159.33. Let's say they're on a subnet 255.255.240. This is not a real subnet nor a real IP address. This is just for demonstration purposes. You'll put your static IP you got from your ISP and then their subnet mask. But let's say you want their servers to handle all that since they set it static for you. That way, when your device boots up, DHCP will request it and it will give it to your router. So to do that, we're going to say IP address, DHCP, and that's all you got to do. You press enter. You could specify a value for the host name if you like. So say your ISP needs to know your host name. We can say host name. Let's say Foley Systems. It could be anything you would like. Say your business name, so that way when your ISP helps you troubleshoot, okay, let's check your DHCP. Okay, now see your host name is XYZ or WX. Like, yes, that's me. So, okay, perfect. So we're having this problem. I'll try the pinger router. If we're not getting that, then we'll go from there. Your network engineers or you as a home user or business, they'll help you troubleshoot. And it's a good way to troubleshoot, set the host name, and best practices. So after we set the port to DHCP, we're going to say no shutdown. This basically tells support that we, the administrator, do not want to shut this port down. So it's not going to be administratively down anymore. Press enter. You can type in exit to exit the interface configuration. So let's say, okay, let's stop here and let's save our configuration again. So that way, major changes, it's not necessary, but if you want to be on the cautious side, especially your first time, I recommend after a major change, save the config. So that way we could roll back in case we mess something up. So let's go back to configure terminal and say, let's configure the interface gigabit 1. Let's say I have an internal IP address. You can set this to DHCP too if you have an internal server like Windows, pfSense, OpenSense, or just a ordinary DHCP internal server. But since this is going to be our gateway, it's recommended that we set it to static. So we're going to do 192.168.1.1. with a subnet mask of 255, 255, 255.0. That way, this is going to be our gateway. We're going to type no shut on this one. Let's go ahead, save our configuration. You don't have to type copy run start all the time. You can just type in WR. That way, it's just automatically Cisco CLI knows to write that to memory. So type in WR. It's going to build that configuration. That way, it saves us quite a bit of time. You can also write these commands in a TXT file, and then you copy and paste them. Basically go line per line. And it's a faster, simpler way if you have to do a mass production. Trying to look for the word. Deployment. If you have to do a massive deployment, using a text file is going to save you a lot of time, especially if you want to learn. That way you could just say, here, I got a start config when it's brand new. I'll copy over to this text file, and then I'll just start messing around with these settings and understand what they do. That's why I recommend is mess around with the CLI, watch other videos. Like mine is just basically help you. There's others out there. I would recommend try to get a grasp before doing any major changes. If it's critical, always go into deep research. If it's non-critical, for this example, it's not critical for me, we're okay to mess around with settings. But we're going to get this back up and online as quick as possible. So after we write our configuration, last time I'll say that, we need to configure our usernames, our DHCP, and SSH. So let's configure username real quick. It's very simple. We'll just type in username. My fingers could type. Let's say admin. And from here, you could either give them a password, which we're going to do for this instance, so we can teach you how to secure that password, a one-time user. So if we say for remote instances for support, or privilege. So we're going to say privilege, since I want to give this user the most privilege I can, because he's going to be the admin. We're going to give him 15. It goes 0 to 15. 0, no privilege, just a regular user. 15 is the top admin. Then we're going to say password. Let's say chicken. Let's go chicken tilde 10. Or 10 tilde. Now, when you save that in your configuration, so if we look at our running config, we can see in the regular running config, if somebody had access to it, it's stored in plain text. So let's encrypt that. So to encrypt a password, we say service and then password encryption. We press enter, and that's going to encrypt our passwords. So we'll make sure it did. As we can see, it looked like it hashed it. So it encrypted that password. It may not be a very strong password, but it's better than having it in plain text. So after we get that user configured, let's get SSH completely done. So to get SSH completely configured, we have to do lines. We have to configure our VT lines, which just stand for virtual lines. Or to be more technical, it is our virtual tail type. Basically, just think of it as a command line interface. that gives you, the user, access to the device's control plane. It's most popular in network devices like Cisco's routers, switches, firewalls, and even access points. VTY is very popular. So we're going to configure our first, let's do 6 lines. We want a max of 6 users at once able to access device. So 0 is count as 1. It goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. That's 6 total users. It's stored in a array type. So we're going to configure our first 6 lines. We're going to say transport input SSH. Now, you don't have to necessarily transport SSH. You could do everything. You could do telnet or our login. But for this example, we're just going to stick to SSH, which is most popularly used. And then we're going to say login local. That way we set our login to use our local database of users. And there's a lot more you can set. As I'll show here. And after you got that set, you want to type in exit. Then we're going to say crypto key generate RSA. So we're going to create an RSA certificate. Let's do the most bits we can, which for this example is 4096. But people will typically do 2048. It's up to you how size you need. Now for SSH 2.0, a minimum, I do so believe, is 1024. But we'll do 2048 just to be extra secure. So we're going to create that. Once that key is generated, it will say SSH 1.99 has been enabled. We'll change that to SSH 2.0. So we'll say IP SSH version 2. That tells it we're going to use the second version. We're also going to set a timeout. So we're going to say timeout. And then we'll do the typical 60-second. So that way it has a good amount of time for the user to access the computer, but not leaving it open long enough for attackers or just someone just coming by. It's like, what's this? And start messing with configs. So after that, SSH should be configured. You go ahead and test it now. You can pause the video here. But our last step in this journey is to get DHCP working. So let's get DHCP up and running real quick. So we could do configure P, IP, DHCP, pool. Now you could give this pool a name. We'll just say main, or for this secure. Now within this pool configuration, you'll configure things like your network, your DNS server, your default router, and even your lease time. So, and your domain as well. Let's configure a network. So we'll type in network. It's 192.168.1.0 with a subnet mask or a slash notation of 24 or subnet mask 255.255.255. Press enter. Now let's configure our default router, which is 192.168.1.1 for my example. Now let's configure DNS server. It could be any DNS server, your internal. So say if you had an internal server 192, 168.1.7 as an internal server. Or you could use Cloudflare and Google DNS. Next, let's set our domain name to your domain you put as in the router's configuration. So for my instance, it's fullysystems.com. The next is the lease time. Set it to your specifications. So say when I lease out to the network, I want them to be permanent. You can just say infinite. There's no other configurations needed. But say you want to set it for maybe 2 days, maybe 2 hours, and about 30 minutes. You can set the hour, minute, your days, hours, minutes. But for my example, it's infinite. It's a very small network. Type in end, write that configuration. To make DHCPs working, we do show IP DHCP. And I think it is binding. It'll show you what clients have currently got a lease from your Cisco DHCP server. That way you can troubleshoot to make sure your DHCP server is working fine and dandy. So that'd be all for this video. This is just a basic configuration to get your network up and running. If you got any other video ideas, please leave them down in the description below. Please leave a like if you like this tutorial and subscribe for more tutorials, networking, and virtual machine needs. And you have a great day.